To the next part of my story, my crazy life, part 4, 25 to 30. I finished off the last one with ending one relationship and jumping straight into another and getting the all clear from blood clots on the brain, which was a massive relief at the time. Massive relief at the time. I had been so worried, but obviously whatever happens, happens for a reason. I believe it must do anyway, because otherwise I don't know why things happen to me the way they do. Anyway, I went on to have 2 more babies with my new partner over this period. The first being Harvey. I was incredibly sick all the way through, and at 3 months my nephew had a heart failure. It turned out he had cerebral palsy. Sorry, I've got an itchy eye. He had, at 3 months old, he was one of twins, and he had a heart failure, and was in hospital for a good year, being treated with all sorts of awful stuff gone on. It really destroyed everything. While he was in hospital, I fostered his twin sister and older 2 brothers, twin brothers, and I was pregnant with Harvey. I was like 3 months pregnant with Harvey at the time that I took them on. It was crazy hard work, and Harvey's dad would go off in a huff and lock himself in our bedroom for days at a time. It didn't make it any easier for me. I was left basically on my own, pregnant, struggling with my own 2 older boys. I was going through court with the older boy's dad, constant court cases with their dad. I had then a 3-month-old baby and 2 3-year-old boys, twin boys, who were quite a handful to look after, and I had to handle all of it on my own while he was locked away, sulking because he couldn't cope. And life wasn't the perfect little fairy tale that he had hoped it would be, which is kind of obvious if you ever experience my world, that if you know me and my story, then it never was going to be easy, was it? At the 20-week scan of Harvey's pregnancy, we found out Harvey had congenital cystic adenomatoid malformations in his lungs. Lots of little cysts across his lungs, and it's like 1 in 30,000 pregnancies has this congenital condition. We had to be referred to a specialist and have scans every week, as these tiny cysts could rapidly and drastically change at any given time. I was petrified about the birth. I had nightmares all the way through, like that he was just going to die at birth, or that it was going to be absolutely gruesome and awful. And I was absolutely petrified. And of course, my partner wasn't being at all supportive at that point. He was just wrapped up in his own little world and walking out on me whenever he felt like it, and blaming me for the fact that our son had a congenital issue that could have happened to anyone. Do you know what I mean? He was just really not helpful at all, and I was probably quite neurotic myself, being pregnant and scared witless, and looking after all these kids, trying my best and facing court battles, my ex was trying to get custody of my sons, and it was pretty much all on my own. At that point in time, I'd isolated myself from my family a lot, so I never asked them for help. I never told them how bad things were and that. These cysts could rapidly and drastically change at any given time. They could just blow up massive and completely, and that could happen at birth, and completely take up all the room in their lungs. With all this, I could no longer foster my niece and nephews, which I felt absolutely awful about. It was heartbreaking giving them up into social care, to be looked after until things got sorted. It was awful. It was such a hard time for our family, and I didn't want to have to give them up, but I had to focus. I couldn't do all the hospital visits. We were having scans constantly, and we had toddlers running around and a baby to cart around. It was craziness. Harvey was born, and x-rays showed the cyst had disappeared. It felt like a miracle. Suddenly my partner was happy and back in love with me. I was so relieved we could be a normal, happy family. Harvey was born in the October, and on New Year's Day I was taking a pregnancy test. It was positive. My first unplanned baby. it was a shock to say the least. It was, I mean, it was 6 weeks after he had been born and I found out I was pregnant again. And with what had happened with the previous pregnancy, we were meant to undergo genetic testing before we conceived again to make sure that this wouldn't happen. If we had a further baby, it wouldn't happen to them. I was absolutely petrified that this was going to happen again. When that line showed up, my heart sank. Not because I didn't want another baby, but because I knew he would be gone. I knew he was going to leave me at that point. It was, that line came up and I thought, he's not going to stick this out. I knew he couldn't. At first he acted like he was happy and that it was all okay. He didn't have the stamina to share in my crazy life. He lasted 3 months of the pregnancy. I spent most of that 3 months being violently sick and bleeding. We had to keep going back for scans of the baby to check the baby was okay. Obviously the stress was humongous. I was losing weight rapidly. I was bleeding every couple of days. I was having like bleeding and thinking I was going to lose this baby. Which, no matter what the circumstances are, it's awful to go through that. You don't, that's when you go, I do want this baby, regardless of the circumstances. But you don't want to lose it, do you? It was still my baby. At that point, he kept saying, well, why do we have to come back for scans all the time? And he was really hateful to me at that point. And then he left, and he really made a big deal about leaving, and he really tried to turn his family against me and turn everyone against me. He wanted to hurt me. He didn't care that I was pregnant and I shouldn't have been put under so much stress. He really wanted to hurt me. Even the judge in the court in the end said to him, I think you need to let this lady get through this pregnancy and give her a break. And in his opinion, I was always the wrong one anyway, no matter what. So when he left, he took the car, of course, and on top of all the stress, I was having to push a buggy 3 miles twice a day for all the school runs. I nearly lost her all the way through. Grace arrived eventually, 5 weeks early. My baby Grace, my saving Grace. She was tiny and she didn't thrive at all. All the stress made my breast milk worthless. Though through the last 2 years and following 4 years, I was in horrible court battles with both fathers. By 29, I was wrecked. A dear friend, my son's godfather, Stefan, I love him so much, I still, to this day, well, like, he's the best person I've ever known, that was just such a good friend to everyone, such a good person, and he tragically was killed in a car crash. And it just totally destroyed me. I had a complete nervous breakdown and I turned to drugs. I was abusing drugs, abusing my body, I was self-harming, I was suicidal whenever the kids weren't with me, which was a hell of a lot of the time because they were all going for access weekends and everything. And I would just go on a bender because I couldn't handle it. I couldn't handle being at home on my own, not making excuses. That's my shit, that's what happened, yeah. And I know that I was wrong. I know that I made some big cock-ups in my life at that point. But I was a wreck, completely not a wreck. This gave my older son's dad the opportunity he was waiting for, and he won custody of my sons. I was broken, totally destroyed. If it hadn't been for having the younger two and the fact that their dad didn't want custody, he just wanted to be able to show off his trophy children. But he didn't want custody, so the younger children stayed with me, and I thank God every day that they did, because I wouldn't be here otherwise. They kept me strong. I had to stay strong for them, and I did eventually. I mean, I've battled in and out of drug abuse over the last sort of 10 years. Well, 10 years, about 6 years ago. I went through like in and out of different drugs and going straight and getting sorted, getting my head together, and then cocking up again. The drugs were, I know, my own fault and the wrong thing to do, but I can't change what happened now. I can only be honest about it and accept those consequences as my own. I hope you can respect my candour, and I hope it helps anyone in the same boat. Now at this point I was diagnosed in the pregnancies with anti and postnatal depression and severe anxiety, agoraphobia, and of course they all got much worse with the drug abuse and the suicidal tendencies. When the children weren't there, I would become suicidal because I genuinely believed that they were better off without me, like their father was always telling me. That was probably emotionally the hardest period of my life, medically speaking. It was all about the mental and emotional issues going on. Those years were an experience. I'll follow on from 30 on next. Thanks for joining me. Much love to you all, and breathe easy, folks.